Hey guys, Illusion Amana here, and today we're going to learn about making low poly models and as well as texturing and UV mapping for low polys. So this will be useful for if you're into just wanting to make something that looks like retro games like on the PlayStation or Nintendo 64, or if you're into making games or anything really that requires 3D graphics for low performance devices like phones or mobile, and so on. So sit back, relax, and enjoy these tutorials. Follow along and feel free to share whatever you make at the end of them. I'd love to see them. The last thing I want to say before we get started is big fat thanks to Cuppa Joe and Tofu Pixel for inspiring me to do these tutorials. And yeah, let's get started. All right, guys, here we are in Blender, and you'll see, I have the magnifier open right here so you can see some of the icons. They're a bit small, but this should hopefully make the tutorial a little bit easier. So we're going to just start with a blank scene, and you can leave everything in here like the light or the camera. Um, I, I like to at least get them out of the way personally, so delete. And we're going to be messing around with the cube here. Now, if you don't have a cube in your scene, you'll probably want to just add one to get started, naturally. So you'll go up here and add to mesh, and then you'll click the primitive that you want to start with. Personally, I recommend starting with a cube or plane, cylinder, or cone. Those are the most common objects you'll use in a low poly. But for everything just about that I do, I always start with a cube, just because I can derive anything from it. So once I have it added, I'm just going to adjust its position with our tool set over here. If you're not familiar with the tool set, a quick rundown is that you most commonly use these three right here, the move, the rotate, and the scale. And they do just as that. They take the object and allow you to move it around the 3D space, rotate it in any direction on the 3D space, and then scale naturally too, the same way. So from here, I want to start modeling. So we're going to go up here to our modeling tab and just press that. And this is going to bring us to roughly the same setup, except this time our cube looks a little bit different. Right now, mine has all of its vertices selected. So a quick rundown of how the modeling setup works is that you have the same three tools, your move, your rotate, and your scale, except instead of manipulating the entire object, this is going to manipulate specific parts of the object. There are three modes as well in our modeling mode. There's this right here, this point, this dot right here, a vertex mode. So that lets you manipulate a single point on an object. There's also edge mode, which lets you grab an edge and do the same thing, except this time with an edge or a line that's formed between two vertices. And then the last one is a face select mode, and that one lets you do all of those except with a whole face. Usually it's 4 lines. It might be 3 if you're using triangulation. It better not be more than 3 edges or more than 4 edges. At that point you have an end gone and you need to go back and try again. So the first thing that I want to do is start exploring some of the advanced tools that we use for modeling. Now I say advanced tools because like you can technically model with the basic tools, the move, the rotate, and the scale, using any of these, by just goofing around. But for the most part, we have an end goal here, and that's to make a cup of ramen. That's going to teach us every tool that we're ever going to need for at least making low poly objects. And of course, we'll go into more advanced tools in the future, in a future tutorial, such as like if we do character design, which I do have planned. So keep your eyes out for that one. But for this one, we're just going to stick to modeling and we're going to stick to the basics. So for our cube, because I want to turn it into a ramen cup, basically want to turn it into a cylinder. So I'm going to go up here, I'm going to select our edge mode, and I'm going to bisect our cube with one of our tools. Now, this tool is the loop cut tool, and that's exactly what it does, is it allows us to bisect shapes. And you'll see that I already cut 2 shapes out right here. I already cut 2 loops through our shape right here. If you want to do more cuts, or if you want to change the layout of your cut, what you can do is you can actually hold down the mouse button and drag when you when you drop down your edge loop before you let go of your mouse button. Once you let go, it'll place it. But for our case, I want everything to be pretty symmetrical. Next thing I'm going to do is select all of the outer lines, the outer edges. I'm going to go to our scale tool. Now I don't want to scale on all axis, whatever the plural is for that. I don't want to scale on that because it's going to do this. It's going to create this weird like can star shape, and that's not our vibe. Instead, I want to only scale on 2. Now there's this little square in between each of the axi that we can grab and push in, and that'll allow us to scale on the 2 that are on either side of it instead of all 3 or just 1. And there we go, we have our cylinder shape. So the next thing I want to do is go into face mode up here, grab the bottom, and do that scale again. Same thing, 2 axis, because I want this almost conical shape going. You know, obviously we're not aiming to make a cone, we're still trying to keep our cylinder, but we do want it slightly conical just to get that bit of depth going on. The next thing I want to do is modify the top, and we're going to use the second most important tool, which is the insert face tool for low polygons. So we're going to click it, and it's going to give us this handle after covering the faces that we selected. Now if we grab this handle, this circle ring, and we bring it in, you'll see that it created a lip or a ring of new polygons on the outside of that selection. And that's exactly what we want going on, because that's going to be the lip of our cup. Now we need to create a cavity. Now this is the #1 most important tool in probably just modeling in general. It's the extrude region tool. So I'm going to select it, and it's going to give us this the same thing, a ring, but this time a pivot point, or a handle, I should say. Now we don't want to select the ring here. We can select the handle, but I want to just make sure it's noticed that this isn't the only mode that this tool can be in. And most tools have multiple different modes. So if we look up here on the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a mode that says it's set to normal, but we can set it to XYZ. And what XYZ does is it just brings up this our 3-handle tool, and each handle is pointed into a different global direction. And so that'll let us manipulate the extrude into a specific axis if we need it. What normal does is it just bases the angle off of the faces. So if I were to, for instance, select this polygon right here, then it would give us the handle perpendicular to that face. So we're going to extrude this in just a little bit, because I'm going to actually fill this cup with ramen, and I don't want to bring it all the way to the bottom. You can if you want, but I'm not going to do that. Just personal preference. I am going to bring it in just a little bit with the scale tool, help out with that cone shape. And then I'm actually going to delete these faces because I don't need them, and they're going to kind of get in the way when we do UV mapping in the next tutorial. So I'm going to hit the delete key, and it's going to bring up the delete menu. We're going to select faces only, and that's going to create our cavity. All right, now moving on to our ramen, what we're going to do is we want to combine a plane with this cup so that they're part of the same object group. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to add up here in the edit mode. We're going to add plane. It's going to drop it to the bottom. So I'm going to bring it up to about the level that I think the ramen will sit at. That looks good. I'm going to go back to our edge loop cut tool. Now there's a reason why I deleted the floor of our ramen cup and I added a new plane. That's because I really want our ramen to have a little bit more like manipulation points, like a few more manipulation points than just the even cross section. So what we're going to do is, if you remember earlier, I mentioned that most tools have a little options mode up here where you can change the mode. This one lets us change the number of cuts that we do every time we do an edge loop cut. So I'm going to just move mine to 2. You can put yours at whatever number you really want, but because this is low poly, I'm going to keep mine at a pretty low number. So this gives me, if I go back into if I go into vertex mode, this gives me 4 points that we can manipulate instead of just 1. So I'm just gonna like bring it up and down. I could probably bring it in and out too if I really wanted to have a little bit more fun with it, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm gonna keep it pretty basic. I absolutely implore you to have fun and make whatever shape that you want. Like this tutorial isn't strictly like, hey, make a ramen cup. It's, hey, make a simple object in low poly and start applying this to other objects as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my scale tool. I'm going to start selecting vertices on the outer edge. I'm not going to select the corner vertices. I'm just going to select the edge ones. And you could probably do the same thing with the edge tool too, but it's going to be a little bit more important to stay, a little bit more optimal to stay in edge mode. I'm just going to shrink them in until they clip into the cup. I'm going to do the same for the corners too. There we go, looks good. And there's our ramen. And if we don't like how deep it is, like we want it a little bit deeper or we want it a little bit more shallow, what we can do is we can bring it up or bring it down. I'm going to bring mine up just a smidge. The next thing I want to do is I want a lid for the cup. I just want it to look like it's kind of like peeled up and hanging over. Now normally I would make the lid separate just because that's the most optimal way to do. But because I'm teaching a lesson on all of the tools that you're going to need for low poly, I'm going to actually do this the hard way. That way you can get an idea of how every tool works and where it might be optimal to use them. So to make my lid, I'm going to just select an edge, any one edge around the outside ring of lines, of edges on our cup. And I'm going to extrude it out. Now, for most of you, that might seem a little bit odd because, I thought you could only extrude faces. No, you can actually extrude edges too. So for this, I'm going to bring it up into 3 segments because that's the level of detail that I want my lid to have, is 3 sections. I'm going to grab the outer edge right here of the center selection, and I'm going to scale that out. Now you'll notice here that the scale looks bad. Like we don't want this kind of warped scale. So we're going to talk about how even these tools have modifiers, have extra settings to them too. And in this case, we're going to talk about the orientation setting. Now, when we're working on flat planes like this, we want to set the orientation to normal right here. And what that'll do is reorient it to face directly perpendicular to the face that it's being manipulated on. And the more lines you select and the more warped the ring or shape of edges that you select, or even faces, the more that that normal will skew off. So just keep that in mind. This is really only helpful if you've got about one face in between your selections or as a part of your selection. So from here I'm going to scale out until I get a nice round like stop sign like shape. There we go. So an octagon. Now that's not the end of this story right here, because the way faces work when we texture them, we know that if we're going to put a texture on this side of the face, it's going to show on this side. And ramen cups don't have their label printed on both sides of the lid. So we want the inside to have its own texture, whether it's going to be plain white or something else, who knows. So we're going to actually need to turn this lid into a 3D shape, but we're going to do it pretty basic. So we're going to select the ring, and as you can see, because we're in normal mode, but because we've selected, multiple different faces that have different shapes and sizes to them, our normal is skewed off slightly. So this is no longer helpful to us. But what can be helpful is we can actually check some of the other options that we have. I like to use the view one right here. And what I like to do is kind of bring it as close as I possibly can over here until I can just see a sliver. I'm going to go to extrude, and then I'm going to go to XYZ. Ooh, this one actually doesn't have, but that's okay. We're going to grab the outer ring this time, and we're just going to push it out. Just enough, not too much. We're going to go back to our scale, and if you remember, we're still on view. We're going to try and make it so that this line, the selection line, is right there across. I'm just going to scale it in. So we still have this cavity. Now we need to fill it in. So we're going to stay on edge mode. We're going to go to, we can either go to our selection pointer or the move tool. It doesn't matter. I'm going to take these two edges. And I want to make sure that, I fill in this space. Now there is a fill hole tool, but it's not very optimal, especially when it comes to UV. So we're going to follow the topology of this and bridge all of these shapes across. So now with those two selected, I'm going to go up here into edge. And I'm going to go to bridge edge loops. And what that's going to do is, that's going to fill in with a face right there in that cavity. And we need to do the exact same for the rest, for the top and the bottom. Now let me show you what happens when we fill instead of do bridge edge loop. I'm going to undo that, and then I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to faces, and I'm going to go to fill. Now it still works, but it gave us a triangle, two triangles instead of an actual like quad, which isn't a bad thing necessarily, but we want to stick to quads just for the sake of being able to visualize our topology very well. From here, though, you can actually turn your tries back to quads under face, tries to quads, and you can even do the reverse and triangulate a face. In a future tutorial where we cover advanced modeling, we'll talk about when it's appropriate to force a shape to be to display triangles, but for right now, it's not necessary. So the last thing we need to do for our tutorial is we need to create some chopsticks or a utensil of some kind to match our ramen cup. So I'm going to actually go up here to this little drop down that says edit mode. I'm going to go into object mode. So it's going to select our object. We don't need it selected anymore though. I'm going to go to add, and just like before, we're going to add in a cube because everything derives from a cube. And we're just going to quickly model this into our shape. Oh, we're still in view mode. Let's change that back to default. And I'm just going to bring it down to probably about there, maybe a little bit thinner. That looks nice. We're going to go back into edit mode. And we're going to cover the last tool that we're going to learn, which is the merge tool. So in vertex mode right here, we're going to select these top two. We're going to go up to mesh. And we're going to go and find the merge tool. We're going to merge at center. So this is how we, for the most part, take a polygon or complex object and try and make it a little bit simpler just by merging some of the vertexes together so that we don't have as complex of an object. Now if you select one and then the other, by the way, and you go into merge, two more options will appear at first and at last. That'll be helpful if you need to merge one point to another instead of merge them to the center. So keep that in mind. The last thing I want to do is just shape the top. So I'm going to make it a little bit wider at the top and a little bit thinner at the bottom. And then we're going to go back into object mode. And our very, very last trick that I'm going to show off is how to do duplicates. So we're going to go to object, right? With our object currently selected that we want to duplicate, we're going to press duplicate objects. And once we do that, our object's going to turn white. But in reality, it's actually our clone. And you'll see our clone is now attached to our mouse. Once you click, it'll paste it into the scene, but we don't want to click just yet. What we want to do is we want to press the X key and see if we can align it. It looks like X isn't the right axis to align to, so instead we'll press the Y key. And there it is, there's the right axis. So if you ever need to align a duplicate, or even anything onto a specific axis, just hit the X, the Y, or the Z key depending on what you need to do. And then another trick is we need to rotate this by 180 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this blue handle right here on our rotation tool. I'm going to start rotating it. But one of the things that's a little obnoxious about this is it's a bit too smooth, and we really like hard angles when we do low poly. It just makes it look that much more low poly like. So what I'm going to do is hold the control key, and it's going to bring up these notches. And every notch is 5 degrees, and it's going to lock it by 5 degrees. So if I look up here, right here, a little too far, you'll see there's a little bit of text that says rotation, and it shows us the degrees. Currently we're at 285 degrees. So if we keep our eye on that while we rotate, we can find 180 degrees, let go, and then we're done. And there is our ramen cup and chopsticks. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining for this tutorial. Our next tutorial, we're going to cover how to UV map and texture this entire object. So stay tuned for that. That should launch right alongside this one. So thank you so much for joining. I hope this helped. Please feel free to share whatever models you make from this tutorial, or let me know if there's something I missed out on, didn't explain anymore, any of that. Once again, thanks to all my Patreons, which will show up on the screen somewhere. And big fat thanks to all of you guys, man. I really appreciate it. And I will catch you in the next tutorial.